little bit. It's a little bit. Yeah.
It's like she mixes, it's like can they hear? Can you hear us all right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Colors.
Can you all hear us?
Yes.
Cool.
Does anyone know if Michael's gonna?
Michael Althauser will not be attending from Tumwater, but Joan will.
Okay, so we'll back down. Little things. And we do apologize for the late start. Our board meeting ran long, and so thank you, Tom, for sending out that email.
Sparse over there.
I know, it's like, no one wants to sit beside me. It's like, no, I don't mind.
I'm coming. I'm doing school. Wait, I'm coming your way. Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's okay. I have it memorized. It's Quincy, right? Quincy.
Quick.
I can look over. Quince.
Yeah.
I want to say, like I see it and I want to say Quince and it's like, no, that's not it.
Stuff over there.
I'll pull it up on my phone.
Okay. You ready? Yeah. Okay. Are you recording?
Yes.
Are we recording already? No, not yet. Oh, we are recording. Should totally. Like just I know, right? Okay, so we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. It is Wednesday, August 23rd, 2023. It is 4:10 and I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the vice chair. Carolyn Cox, our chair, is joining us via Zoom today. And so this is a hybrid meeting and so we'll go ahead and start with introductions. And so we'll start with Lacey, I guess.
Alrighty. Well, excuse me. I'm Carolyn Cox, representing City of Lacey, and I really can't see the table too well. So, Lacey Peeps, if you're here, would you speak up?
Yes, hi, Jennifer Adams, Housing Coordinator, City of Lacey.
Great.
That's
Yeah.
all from Lacey today.
Alrighty. Thanks.
I looked right beside me and she was sitting there. So I was like, Lacey here. And then Olivia.
So I'm Danny Madrone with the Olympia City Council. Joining me is Mayor Pro Tem Clark Gilman and also Darian Lightfoot, Rich Hoyt, and Jacinda Stelgis.
Thank you. And then Tumwater.
I had spoken to Councilmember Kathy earlier this afternoon, and I expect that she would be joining us shortly. I'm Brad Medder, the Tumwater Planning Manager.
Thank you. And then do we have anyone from Yelm?
Hello, Gary Cooper here, Planning and Building Manager for Yelm and the tech team rep. I do not know if Councilman Hess will be here today or not. He was excused from council last night, so based on that, I would think it's not likely.
Thank you. And then I'm Carolina Mejia, and we have Katie Marino, our County Manager, Romero Chavez, Webster, and then Elisa Sparkman, who's technically, but not technically, she's Regional Housing Council staff, and yes, it is. Oh, and Leah, sorry, Leah. Leah's over here in the corner. Okay.
We have that.
Oh, and then we have a guest today, is Talana Reed, and she's joining us from the it's Affordable Housing
Advisory Board.
Advisory Board. Okay, I apologize. I didn't know which one it was. I was like,
Haven is our vice chair for the Homeless Services Advisory Board.
oh, great. And then Talana, Kevin, do you want to let you?
Yeah, I'm with the Affordable Housing Advisory Board and I'm the chair.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cato. I'm the vice chair for the Services Advisory Board.
Okay,
And the chair, Anthony Ducote, could not be here this afternoon. He's not feeling well.
perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. And so next is the review agenda and meeting purpose. And does anyone have any questions about the agenda today? Okay, so we'll move on to the approval of the June 28th minutes. Is there a motion to approve? Has everyone gotten to review those minutes?
So moved.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second,
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All those against say nay. Okay. I apologize. I'm trying to get out of the board. How we, the board runs the meetings, it's a different system. Okay, next, we're moving on to public comment. And do we have anyone, Leah, signed up for public comment?
No.
Okay. Is there any?
I did the roster right before and no one signed up.
Are there any attendees? Attendees in my one.
Would you do that for your? Check in?
We will get the hang of it. Thank you. Oh.
Do have Joan Cathy as an attendee. We're trying to figure out how to promote her to panelist. We're not getting that.
Do we have any more attendees besides Joan?
There's a slight chance that Andy Ryder might try to join us remotely, but he's caught in another meeting right now.
Thank you. So I guess while we kind of figure out our technical issues, we can move public comment down until, but let's go ahead and move to the Quinn Street Village funding presentation. And that's Darian and Rich, so I'll go ahead and pass it.
Great, thank you. I think we have slides, if those could be shared.
Sure can. Well.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
Hey.
There, great. Okay. Thank you so much. My name is Darian Lightfoot, Director of Housing and Homeless Response, City of Olympia. Tonight, I'm here to give an overview on Quinn Street Village, just a snapshot of how the site operates and some history of the tiny home village in Olympia. I think I gotta tell you all for next slide, or let me know. Yeah, no problem.
Trying to promote.
There we go. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. So Quinn Street Village, the history of the site. So there was a large encampment in the city of Olympia's downtown on a parking lot. And so as the site began to grow, it became more of an established encampment. So services went to the site and it became more of a place where people were able to access services, and service providers went and supported folks. And then in 2019, Catholic Community Services became more of a formal operator of the site. It was supported 24/7. There was between 70 and 80 residents. And it grew from being tents or just people living under tarps to tiny home villages. There are 80 tiny home villages on the site, and then there was an intent for it to move. The city purchased the old Quality Inn motel, and that site was demoed and it became prepped for Quinn Street Village. And Catholic Community Services moved Quinn Street Village from the downtown to the old mitigation site to Quinn Street Village, and that began last year and took about 8 to 10 months for the formal move. And now it is a 100-unit tiny home village on the Quinn Street Village property. And we can go to the next site, and here's just a few pictures. The site grew from 80 units to 100 units. Many of those units were built by volunteers from the Faith Alliance. This is its setup currently. The site was recently paved, so it could be better accessed by residents. This is where the kitchen is set up. Has like an outdoor kitchen with tables, and it was recently paved. And the last picture, here's some council members touring the site. In the blue buildings on the back are where the restrooms, shower, and laundry units are. Okay, so like I said, there's 100 tiny homes on the site, 6 bathrooms, 6 showers, washers and dryers, and 2 full-time case managers. So the reason that we expanded the site was just so it could have better services, better operations, could be spread out. It was previously on half of a city block and it was really tight. And we were able to spread it out and have more services on site. And with that expansion too, we moved everyone from Ensign Road, who was occupying, to Quinn Street Village. So there was about 50 people on the site in the mitigation site downtown. And then when we moved, we were able to expand and everyone from Ensign Road went to Quinn Street Village. It does operate as a low barrier site, goes through coordinated entry, like I said, 24/7 operations and case managers on site. And we do have a support with community court where there are a few units on site reserved for people coming out of the community court system. And it is, one more back, please. One more back, please. Going the wrong way.
Oh.
One more back, please. There we go. So like I said, through coordinated entry, countywide coordinated entry, that was changed when the move went from the mitigation site downtown. And when it moved, it was going through kind of a hybrid coordinated entry, working with crew. We were trying to get there. And then once the formal move went to Quinn Street Village, that opened up to countywide coordinated entry on how folks are placed into the village. Okay, next slide. This is just a snapshot of the tiny home village operations in Olympia. So Quinn Street Village, 100 units, Franz Anderson, which opens next week. Woo! 50 units, Plum Street Village, Hope and New Hope. Those are both supported by faith congregations in the community, and Quixote. So I just want to highlight the top 5. Those are all tiny home villages that are funded in some way by the city of Olympia. That kind of kickstarted off with our home fund. Some at different capacities. Quinn Street is 100% funded by the city, where New Hope, we help pay for extermination and utilities and just more of some support. But then Plum and Quince are fully funded by the city.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Do any of these tiny home villages receive HUD vouchers? No, it's all considered shelter housing. And because there isn't any sort of lease agreement, that way it's overseen as a program. So it's not permanent housing. Quixote Village is set up for permanent supportive housing, but that's a different model and they don't go through the city. All of them are technically categorized as a temporary shelter, but the vernacular we use is a tiny home village. So they're all operated in a temporary manner, but no. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, and then the last slide. This is an overview with the budget. Catholic Community Services, again, when it expanded to Quinn Street Village, 24/7 operations, case management on site, just facilities and utilities, going from no utilities or hygiene services to laundry, showers, restrooms. All that just really took an enhanced budget and then just oversight and administration of the site. So the total budget, operating budget for this year is $1,377,000. And that is up another 100,000 from last year, just with cost of living and COLA and all the needed expenses for the site. Yeah, so any questions about Quinn Street or the tiny home village operations in the city? Any questions? No. So I'm gonna kick it over to Rich now to kind of wrap it up unless you had more questions. I do have a question.
Okay.
So the total budget of 1.3 million, almost 1.4 is only for a year?
Correct. Yes, that is a year of operations.
Thank you. Okay.
Well, thank you. For the record, I'm Rich Hoy, Assistant City Manager for Olympia. And the reason why we're here talking about Quinn Street Village is we have a funding need. And we've been asked to bring our funding request to the RHC. So just to highlight again, as Darian mentioned, this is a really important emergency shelter facility for unhoused residents in our region. In fact, it's one of the largest shelter facilities in the county. It's entirely funded by the city to this point. So we are asking for some help with that. And as Darian mentioned, the residents at Quinn Street Village largely came from the mitigation site in the downtown or Ensign Road. And so just taking you back, we all remember what Ensign Road, the situation was there. There was a critical need to address within our region. It was creating a public health and safety concern for our entire region. It was affecting emergency vehicle access to the hospital. It's a very big deal for us to address. Some historical context was that there was a real recognition back when we were dealing with Ensign that was a regional challenge to address. That wasn't just Olympia's to address alone. And that's really embodied in, it's best reflected in an agreement that Olympia and the county reached regarding Franz Anderson. So at the time, the city and the county reached an agreement, and the plan was to address Ensign Road through the creation of a safe parking site at Franz Anderson Road. And around that time, as you all recall, the right-of-way initiative happened with the state. There were significant state dollars that were then flowing in to address the needs associated with unhoused people living on state rights-of-way, particularly along I-5. And so the plan for Franz Anderson pivoted from a safe parking site to creating a tiny home village at that location to address right-of-way needs. The city then chose to address the challenges with Ensign Road by having folks that were residing on Ensign Road move to Quinn Street Village. And I bring this all up to share that at the time in the agreement between the city and the county, the plan was to purchase Franz Anderson property, which we did jointly, which was great. And then the plan was to set up 3 years of operations for either a safe parking site or an emergency housing facility at Franz Anderson, and for those costs to be shared jointly. So again, the plan changed for Franz Anderson. The city addressed the concerns at Ensign Road through Quinn Street Village. To this point, with Quinn Street Village, the city has been entirely funding the costs, and as you can see, the costs are really significant. So we at the time were had the understanding that the dollars that had been set aside for the purchase and the operations at Franz Anderson would be held and made available to support Quinn Street Village. Those were ARPA funds that the county had. So there were $2 million at the time, about $800,000 were used from the county funds to help purchase the property. And so we were under the understanding there would be a balance of approximately 1.2 million that would still be available to help with Quinn Street Village. And we were thinking that that's a huge help to us. That's not quite a full year worth of funding, but it would go a long way to helping the city with those costs. And we have approached county staff about those dollars being made available for Quinn Street. We're appreciative that there's a conversation that's happening at the county regarding the ARPA funds. And the city was asked to bring the request here to the RHC for those dollars. And so that's what we're doing here today. And so I wanted to just share some of the historical context of how we got to where we are. That in our minds, it's really tied to one, Quinn Street Village was critical to address Anson Road, which I think we all recognize as a regional need. And that also, that Quinn Street Village, by using coordinated entry, we really see that as a critical facility to address homelessness within our entire region. We don't see that as just a City of Olympia facility in terms of the need that it's serving. We really see it as one for the region. So we're hopeful that the RHC would support the city's request for funding, and that's why we're here today. Again, this is something that is being discussed at the county commission level, but a recommendation from the RHC, we've been told, would be helpful in that. Also at the time, all the funding requests that were contemplated to go towards Franz Anderson Road in that original agreement that I mentioned, that also contemplated that funding requests related to that would also come to the RHC. So that's why we're here today. And with that, we'd be happy to take any further questions that you have.
Questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, Rich, and let me offer you my historical perspective. And you're correct, we have a local agreement to Franz Anderson. The commitment from the county, I believe it was 1.5 million, not 2 million. And it was to purchase the property and help with the development of Franz Anderson to achieve not just I think it was an RV park. When you said the city pivot to Quincy Street, the county was not part of that conversation. And because we don't have an agreement with the city related to Quincy Street. And I cannot, make you whole at this point, whether you're understanding from the city, the ARPA fund set aside for Anderson was going to move to Quinn Street. So I cannot make you whole on that because that was not part of the conversation. We never had an agreement, a supplemental agreement that addresses that. So I have been part of conversations with the board about this request from the City of Olympia. We just had one. And my recommendation was to bring this matter to the Regional Housing Council, because it's not about the Regional Housing Council sending a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners to use the ARPA funds for this site. I think the recommendation for me to bring to the Regional Housing Council, that's the conversation the board had, is for the Regional Housing Council to find a way to fund what you need, not just this year, but in the long term, because the need is in the long term. And I think the Regional Housing Council needs to be really proactive because this is a regional asset. It is something that we need to fund it. And I don't think it should be a recommendation of the Regional Housing Council for the Board of County Commissioners to allocate ARPA funds for not 1 year. It's not going to solve the problem. Because the problem, I believe, the gap in funding is in the long term. And I believe this group needs to be proactive in having a sustainable funding source for this facility. And that was the conversation the Board of County Commissioners had. So there was not I believe a request to bring to the Regional Housing Council, and the Regional Housing Council will send a request to the board to use ARPA funds. I think the request was to have a regional conversation and how we're gonna be addressing this as a region, the needs of Queens Street. So that's just my historical perspective and my perspective.
I'll just say that, you know, there's two problems here, and one is the long-term sustainability of that site, but there's also the more immediate problem that is how we fund it next year. And currently Olympia is on the hook for all of that, absent any funding from anybody else in the region. And, you know, reading through the ILA around Ensign Road, it was initially intended to be around Franz Anderson, but the intent is very clear that Ensign Road was a regional problem, and that the city and the county were gonna work together on that to figure out the solution, sharing costs and stuff like that. So I just wanna make sure that the intent around that agreement is that we speak to that too, because with the change in which property was being used because of how the state was directing us to do stuff with the right of way, that doesn't erase the intent of the ILA, that we would work together on it.
Well, that's the interpretation. I don't disagree on the intent. What I'm saying is, in that agreement never has mentioned Queens Street.
It does say, it does mention the emergency,
Yeah.
it doesn't mention, it mentions Franz Anderson and the parking facility or other emergency facility. So there
So,
is.
I mean,
something
we can probably have an argument, council member, related to the intent of the specific language on the agreement. But the point, I think, from the county's point of view, is how we're gonna be addressing the immediate need
Mhm.
and the long term. But it's this group who needs to have that conversation. But I don't think it will be appropriate, with all due respect, the Regional Housing Council to send a request for the county to use ARPA funds. As we have in past experiences, you know, never, everybody has been really shy as to the city use ARPA funds the way you think was appropriate. The city of Lacey the same, and we have participated. The board has set aside $3.5 million for the next phase of Franz Anderson. I believe we're in the process of looking at that agreement. The commitment is still there. But I believe the point should be discussed is how we're gonna be addressing the gap now and in the future as a region,
Oh, I don't think we disagree there. But I guess, you know, what do you see as like the role of the county in terms of addressing the long-standing impacts of resolving the issue around Ensign Road?
The role of the county.
Yeah, because Ensign Road needed to be addressed. What do you see as the role of the county in
We
addressing
purchased the property with the city of Olympia.
it? Okay,
We have participated in every single aspect.
okay.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate, you know, that we did not get things clarified in an agreement clearly, you know, when the change happened to have folks move from Ensign Road to Queen Street Village. So that's acknowledged. I think as Councilmember Joan shared, yeah, there was a clear intent to address that in a regional fashion. And there were also understandings that we had City of Olympia's end that there would be county ARPA funds set aside for that purpose, and there are differences of opinion over that. But that was our understanding, and so we've been planning around that. I appreciate what you said about acknowledgement that Queen Street Village is supporting a critical regional need and that we need to work on sustainable funding. So I'm encouraged that we have agreement around that and would love to have further discussions around how that best gets addressed. There have been some discussions about using other sources of funding. Depending upon the source of funding, we may have some concerns about that in terms of taking away from other critical needs. We're just, so, you know, we would not be advocating, for instance, to use capital home fund dollars for that purpose, just as an example. There's just, the needs are so great and the dollars so limited. So, you know, we would love to have further conversation with the county about a better way to address it, if not ARPA funds. But that was our understanding, because those dollars would be set aside. And I understand you. have a
I
different
understand that's the disagreement, because I don't know how we got to the point of the city understanding we're gonna be using ARPA funds for Queen Street. I don't want to get into that level of conversation, but I think that really is the point of it, how we're gonna be addressing as a region, again, as a region. I don't think is the conversation should be, let's have a conversation with the county as to if it's no ARPA funds, what other funds will be. Honestly, I don't see it. I think as a region, there needs to have those conversations. If it's no home funds, what other funds do we have? And this has to be a priority, but the Regional Housing Council, then let's make it a priority to fund it. I guess that's the plug that I'd like to make. If this is really a priority for the Regional Housing Council, because I do believe that it's a key asset to the region, then let's prioritize the funding that we have available to the Regional Housing Council.
And I would share just one additional point is that the city is putting substantial dollars into Queen Street Village and other homeless response facilities well beyond the investments that we have through the home fund. And so we're also asking that the county step up and work with us on that too. So that's part of the point we're trying to make.
Let me get Carolyn and then I have. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad that we're having this discussion because I think we're kind of looking at our future about we're standing up these places and then how are we going to sustain the funding for them. I guess questions I would have of Rich and maybe Tom and Keely are, where are those ARPA dollars? What are the consequences if the city, if the county says, no, that funding has already been committed? And, what sort of consequences are we looking at here?
You wanna?
Well, I guess I don't want to speak to the county ARPA dollars. That's outside of my purview. So I don't, I can't speak to, I leave it to the county manager and the commissioner to speak about county ARPA dollars.
I guess I'll jump in then with my comments. The board had a discussion about the request for Quinn Street last week. I'm trying to get my timeline straight. Last week. And the recommendation from the board was basically to wait until this meeting happened and the hope to find like a long-term solution as well. There are 600,000, if I'm correct, that are kind of left over from the purchase of it, and those are the ones that we're considering. But other than that, we don't have any other available funding from ARPA to be able to give. We can't cover the full amount. That's just, it's not a realistic expectation that, we can promise or even like just have a conversation. It's just not existent. And so the board will continue to have this conversation. Not sure when that conversation will happen, but bringing the points that the city of Olympia has made, the county, has always been committed in being good partners. And, we have always set aside funds to also support any regional projects that, have happened. And there's a long story that goes along with Ensign Road. So Carolyn, I guess just in terms of ARPA, right? That's kind of where we are as a board. I mean, it's still being considered. And there is 600,000 kind of set aside that were left over from the Franz Anderson
purchase, is that correct? That's.
Yeah, it was, the board allocated close to 5 million for affordable housing
Yeah.
as an umbrella. And out of that is been taken pieces of that. And speaking of other pressures, other priorities, the board and the county has also seen a lot of pressures and other priorities to use ARPA funds. We don't have enough money to meet all the needs. And that is clear to every jurisdiction that is included here today. So how are we gonna be prioritizing? And I believe what Commissioner Mejia said is correct, is out of the allotment of the $600,000, the board has not decided whether it goes to Queen Street. That conversation has not occurred, set aside. And I was hoping to have this conversation today that we can advocate myself on the long-term sustainability of Quincy Street. And that's the conversation, I believe, because let's just play this out. If the board decides to commit $600,000 for Quincy Street this year, what is gonna happen the year after?
I think it will take the pressure off the long term maybe, and so I think that's kind of what not to speak on behalf of the city of Olympia, but it's just kind of the short term solution of, how can we fund next year and then maybe have a more in-depth conversation as the Regional Housing Council on the long-term needs. Because realistically, I don't think the county can enter in a commitment of a long-term, like we have the availability, that specific funding, right? That the board hasn't decided on yet, so I'm not speaking on behalf of the board here. That might be some assistance, right? But long-term is kind of where I think this group needs to have a conversation, because we do not, also want to see 100 homes that are providing shelter right now shut down as a region, because it's not going to just impact the city of Olympia, it's going to provide impact to all of the jurisdictions present right now. So I think in that term, seeing that oversight, I do agree with the county manager of having that conversation as a Regional Housing Council on how we move forward in the long term. As the Regional Housing Council, but next year. So my question, Rich, for you is, if the county were to decide, if the board were to approve this funding, right, it's only half of the funding. Like, where is the rest of the funding going to come from? Is that going to be a request for the Regional Housing Council now, or is it going, like, where is the rest of that funding?
Well, so first of all, we're grateful that the county's having that conversation. And if we're able to support the 600,000, we would be incredibly grateful for that. And so we would take that up into our budget process. Our commitment is to keep Queen Street Village open. So we got to find a way. I mean, we've been managing this as an emergency. We have a declared emergency in our community and our entire region related to homeless response. And we do not have yet a sustainable finances figured out for how we're going to support this year after year. We just don't have it yet. So we're managing year to year. Feels like crisis to crisis, but that's something that we're grateful for the home fund. That helps a lot, but we need to continue to work on a sustainable funding plan, and we need to continue to advocate to the state that we need their support. And so, we would welcome the conversation here at the RHC and with the county about a sustainable funding plan. So the 600,000 would help the city in a big way going into our budget process, and then we'll have to get creative and figure out the rest. Does that help, Commissioner?
Yeah, and just again, it will be up to the full board, but it's just so I can bring that information back to them, and the county manager can also help relay kind of the conversation.
I just wanted to make sure that Councilmember Cox got the second half of her question answered.
Sorry.
No, about consequences, I think is what you were asking for.
Well, yeah, I was gonna repost to Rich here. Like what happens if the county says no? And you're not able to get the 600,000? What are the consequences to Quint Street Village or some other program where you have to rob Peter to pay Paul?
I wish I had a clear answer to that. That would be something that we would need to discuss with our full council as part of the budget process. We'd have to discuss the financial challenges that we have related to our homeless services within Olympia. So I don't want to share today that we'd be closing Quint Street Village. We just can't do that. We need to continue to support that as a critical facility. I don't know how we would address it, but the 600,000, meeting us partway on our request would be a huge help to us, and we'd be very grateful for that.
Thanks, Rich. I agree. We need to have further discussion about this, and I would just put forward that before we undertake any more projects than we already have, that we have sustainable funding plans in place for operating anything new and certainly what already exists. Because ARPA funding is a one-time thing. We can't rely on that. Thank you.
Just want to respond to this notion of long-term sustainable funding and acknowledge that both we're in a crisis and we didn't predict the ARPA funds coming. We didn't predict the right-of-way funds coming, and we don't know what federal or state resources might come next. So it's two conversations. One is about how do we long-term continue to provide housing and services to folks. But the other one is, what's the best way as a community and as a region that we put to work these funds that are essentially one-time windfalls that come to us? So I guess I would say it's not an either or. It's not either talk about ARPA and right-of-way money or talk about whether it's home fund or other long-term funding we have. But I would hope that we would collaborate to figure out how to use these one-time monies in the most impactful way, as well as trying to figure out as close to sustainable funding as we can come, understanding that this is both a crisis upon us and it's something that we're receiving funds from state and federal government for. So.
Did you have your hand
Oh,
up?
no, I do have something to say. I'm just listening. I'll say it for another time.
I want to thank you, Carolina, for keeping the conversation alive with the commission around this need. That means a lot to us. And anything that we can do to help support that request, please let us know. I was under the impression that some kind of recommendation, not a strongly worded letter or anything, but just a recommendation from the RHC that yes, this will help us close this gap. And we know that, and we are planning on that longer term conversation could be helpful. So I'm curious about your perspective on that.
Well, from my perspective, right, I feel like I'm the biased commissioner talking on this because I was the one who proposed, brought the proposal forward. And so for me, it's, again, right, I would be like, yeah, let's do a recommendation, right? But I know that my seatmates, right, have a decision point to reach too. So I would say yes, just from me talking on my own. But I do represent the county, so it kind of puts me in a very difficult situation. But I guess as a voting member of the Regional Housing Council, I would say a recommendation, just saying, a longer conversation is going to take place, but the assistance for short term, would be helpful. And there's going to be conversations happening at the City of Olympia on how to cover the rest of the gap. Because I think that's the question that we're gonna get is like, well, 600,000 doesn't cover the full amount, you know, what's going to happen. And so just letting the board know that this will assist in kind of helping cover that gap for next year. And then at that point, the Regional Housing Council will be having a conversation on how we keep sustaining this project. Okay, any more questions?
Well, do we want to make that formal recommendation? I'd be willing to, support that as well. We've got Carolyn and, did Joan make it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there she is. I see her on the screen. So curious on thoughts from others.
I'm happy to support it. How about Joan?
Yes.
Is this something that you view as like needing an official vote on, or you've heard
I
from all
don't-
four of
yeah,
us?
I
We're not-
don't
we-
think
We don't
so.
wanna, we're not, I don't think it's the plan to put anything in writing, but you can carry that
Yeah.
message forward.
Yeah, I don't think something in writing, I think then at that point, it would create kind of this message that the RHC is trying to tell the board on how to spend the ARPA, and that's kind of just a recommendation that,
Yeah.
you know,
But you can
Sort
carry
of, yeah.
forward that unanimously on the RHC where we think that would be a huge help in closing the gap on keeping Quinn Street funded through the next year, knowing that there's a longer term conversation in play.
yeah, and so maybe for staff, adding this to a future agenda, so we can kind of discuss what the long-term plan is going to be.
I have a discussion on our work plan at 5:20.
Very timely because I have to leave.
Oh. Thank you, Ramiro.
Also for our representatives from the advisory board, you're absolutely, you're a member of the RHC, you just don't vote. So, but if you feel comfortable at this point saying anything that's on your mind, that's absolutely acceptable. So, okay, just so you know.
I have something to say then.
Yeah.
I appreciate all the sheltering options. I'm a direct service provider. And as many shelter options as possible is very much needed, but more so affordable housing. I mean, we need people off the streets. For health reasons, for just life reasons, people need to be housed. And, but putting dollars into sheltering is great, but a plan to move towards, affordable housing for as many people as possible, I think is what should be at the forefront of every plan. Because it's just a temporary solution. And I think to get the community involved, and to buy in, you have to look at those things. I do tenant education and have been in the homeless services part of it. And then now working with folks at risk of losing housing. And there are a lot of people who can't afford to live where they live, who are on the brink of homelessness. We have to look at long-term and getting those services built up so that, in our sheltering program, so that folks can move towards looking at how to live in an affordable housing unit after this. I mean, there's so many layers to it. And definitely keeping folks with lived experience involved in the process and those on the front lines. But yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on back to Tawana for the Affordable Housing Advisory Board recommendations.
That broke my nervousness. So good afternoon, I'm Tawana Reed, and I was elected as chair of the Affordable Housing Advisory Board. And as I previously stated, I do work for the Tenants Union of Washington. I'm as a community organizer and an advocate for tenants at risk of homelessness due to unlawful landlord practices and are just facing eviction and providing tenant education and whatnot to folks. I'd like to start by saying thank you for engaging the community in this process. As the board is the community. This is my first time coming before you, and before I present, I wanted to briefly share about our process. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the board is comprised of 11 very unique individuals who represent many demographics in Thurston County. I serve on multiple boards, and I can honestly say that this is one of the most diverse boards that I've served on, that I've seen or served on. We are a board of banking executives, direct service providers, leaders of local organizations, renters, homeowners, developers, representatives from all of Thurston County. And we have representatives from our LGBTQ community. And while I represent the young folks, we have some of our senior community members also. We are racially and socioeconomically diverse, as well as having representation from folks with lived experience of homelessness and housing insecurity. We're at the table with a common goal of wanting to provide as much affordable housing as possible to as many people as possible. And on May 24th, 2023, the RHC approved issuing a request for proposals to solicit applications for capital affordable housing projects. Funding available under the RFP totaled about $5.5 million and in funding from the local home fund, county and Olympia. HB 1406 and Senate House Bill 2060. Well, that's where that was from. The RFP was issued on June 9th and applications were due July 20th. In total, 17 applications were submitted, requesting approximately $14.6 million. Staff determined that 2 applications were not eligible for funding, resulting in 15 applications that were reviewed and scored with a total request of just, again, over $14 million. We did not take the task lightly, and through a lens of equity, the advisory board individually reviewed and scored each application. We gave ourselves 2 weeks to complete this process, this difficult task, but we did it. And then met on August 17th to make recommendations. 4 of the members on the advisory board are associated with organizations that submitted applications, but to ensure that there were no conflicts of interest, those 4 members participated in scoring the applications other than their own and did not participate in the August 17th meeting. Where we discussed each individual application and funding recommendations were made. The discussion was very rich and everyone contributed valuable insight to the conversation. And then you'll see in your packet, probably the recommendations that were unanimously supported. But I think for the record, should I go with and read the individual awards or no?
I don't think you.
Okay, cool. Cool. Let's read it from me. And plus I can't see that little writing. So I'm not part of the young group. I was just kidding. So I will highlight some of the key factors that are also probably included in your packet. Although the Lehigh Franz Anderson Permanent Supportive Housing scored near the top, because there's already substantial local leverage in the project, the group decided that we wanted to prioritize other worthwhile projects. Despite the mid-range scores, the board is recommending full funding for roof and rebuilding together due to the modest size of their requests and our desire to support the preservation of existing homeownership and rental assistance throughout the county for cost burden households. The group made awards at 60% to the remaining top scoring projects. And after that allocation of a little over $900,000 was remaining to allocate, the group decided to add 1/2 of this amount, which was $468,745 to the Housing Authority Sequoia North and the other half to 228 Olympia projects. And this was as a reflection of our 2 highest, they were our 2 highest priority projects. To summarize our thought process, we genuinely believe that more beds sooner rather than later is what our unhoused neighbors in our community as a whole need. And accepting the recommendation from the Affordable Housing Advisory Board will result in the full $5.5 million in available funding under the RFP being awarded. The funding is expected to support the creation of 137 new units of affordable housing, in addition to maintaining affordable housing for a modest number of additional households and providing much needed rental assistance in rural Thurston County. Our recommendation is that the RHC approve the list of project awards from the Affordable Housing Board and recommend approval by the Board of County Commissioners.
Thanks so much, Talana. I'm temporarily taking over as chair because Carolina had to run out real quick. So really appreciate you and the entire advisory council. I've done grant review before. It is a lot of work, especially when you go the extra mile to give those equity considerations. And it's always so sad to have all these requests and they're all good projects that need to happen and there's just not enough to go around. Thank you. So questions for Talana or for the RHC in general?
I do just want to add quickly that we did hand out a supplemental sheet that provided, again, very small print, we apologize. It includes a little more detail on some of the projects. Jacinda put this together. We'll send it out to the full list, sorry. This kind of happened at the last minute. Thanks, Leah, for sharing that. So that just provides a little more detail on the projects in terms of the number of units, their income level, their full funding request and some notes about the projects, so.
Yeah, and I appreciate that because some of the feedback I had is just by looking at this, one of the ways that I value the work of the advisory council is to also put in some work myself to evaluate the work that you've done. And there's just not enough information in this sheet. So I know there's a super crunched timeline on getting all this together. But yeah, next time around, if this could come to us in advance so that I can do that, at least that high level look at it, that would be great. So any questions? I see either Carolyn or Joan, do you have any questions for this?
No.
No, like you, I've been through this process before and I think they did an excellent job and a thorough job. And I appreciate how they presented it and agree that seeing the extra considerations that were made, this is very well done and quite an improvement. So I feel it, the work that went into this. So thank you.
Well, yeah, and here I echo Joan's sentiments exactly. It is hard work and it can be gut-wrenching work when there's so many worthy projects and only so many dollars to go around. So thank you.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Clark.
I just wanted to call out and appreciate the stabilizing existing housing, the balance in the rural county, and the ADUs as an innovation I've been pretty excited about. Homes First has been working on. So I think along with building these new big, amazing buildings, that diversifying the investments that way is really wise. Appreciate that.
And that was really the board's intent, to spread the dollars as far as we could with the great leadership of Tom and Jacinda assisting and answering some questions.
Well, I apologize, Talana, but I do have two questions.
Okay.
On this colorful spreadsheet, I see Foundation for the Challenge, but I don't see them anywhere on the one where the funding package is. It's the second from the top. It looks like acquire and rehabilitate for disabled tenants.
I see them on here.
It's on here, but it's not on the funding package one. Yeah. So my question is there a reason that it's not on this one?
No. Other than the fact that we were just trying to turn it around very quickly.
Got it. There's no.
So is it one of the not eligible or were they not?
No, they
offered
were
funding?
eligible, yes. They
They
just.
were not offered funding.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. My other question is I'm really intrigued by the Tenants Union of Washington State and just seeing the project name, Maintaining Housing Stability Through Tenant Leadership Development. I am so intrigued by that. And I can understand why that might not qualify in this specific pot of funds, but is there another, is there somewhere else that this project might have a better place in terms of getting funding? Because I think that is really important work. It's a huge gap in our community.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not maybe not a question for you, but Tom, Jacinda, Akili, Darian?
Yeah, so I would say for this part, we did determine because it was a service, is not a capital project, that it was not eligible for this fund source. Certainly, we have dollars that go to service activities, and so it could be eligible for future RFP processes. So certainly we would look at that based on the fund sources that we have. As everyone knows, this past spring, we did our large RFP, put out $13 million. Most of those awards were for 2 years, so it's probably gonna be another year and a half, 2 years before the next large round of funding becomes available, but we do anticipate a smaller RFP this spring. So maybe more limited depending again on the priorities that the Homeless Services Advisory Board's identified for that activities, but certainly and who knows what new funding will be coming from the states, whatnot. So for right now, for this RFP, it was not eligible, but certainly it would be under consideration for future projects, for future RFPs.
Excellent, excellent.
And I'd be happy to answer any other questions outside of this too.
Yeah, well, I just saw it on there and I was like, wow, that sounds like a huge need in our community. And like, I just want to figure out how we can get that project funded, from a separate pot of funds, from a different process, or, as Tom said, as other funding becomes available from the state. It just seems like something that needs to happen. So I just wanted to call that out and bring attention to it. Carolina, I'm gonna pass the chair torch back to you, if you're ready for it.
Yeah.
Is everything okay?
Yes, sorry, this building tends to automatically lock down and I just wanted to make sure that I had my badge so we wouldn't all be locked in, so. Sorry for that.
So just so you know, we've all gone through our questions. So if you have any questions, the time is now, or you could entertain a motion.
I don't have any questions. Just, I guess, thank you. Again, I know these applications, they're not easy, they're very hard, and it's always the debate of, there's not enough funding to go around, and, not to say that any of these projects are not worth the funding, but it's just, again, what's available. So just thank you for assisting in making those hard decisions and for putting in the work for this, and really appreciative of it. Okay, now I'm ready for a motion.
I move that we recommend to the county commission the recommendations that were made by the Affordable Housing Advisory Board.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? I'll call for the vote. Everyone say aye. Sorry.
Don't speak your
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And against? Okay. Sorry, I've been spoiled by the board and everyone. Okay, next is the Homeless Service Advisory Board recommendations.
Yes, so the Homeless Services Advisory Board has 2 recommendations. We have 2 staff reports. One was a supplemental report. I've been asked for this round to present on behalf of the Homeless Services Advisory Board. Partially because our chair is out, and also just we're just getting rolling. So I will be representing the will of the advisory board. And Kevin, at any point, if you would like to chime in, just please feel free to do so if I forget anything. Great. All right, so the first is the Lived Experience Steering Committee. So the staff report, I'll just tell you in story, because I like telling stories. So as you recall, the Lived Experience Steering Committee came about by the Regional Housing Council setting aside $150,000 in 2021 to find consultants to develop a steering committee that would inform the entire homeless crisis response system with regards to addressing vetting strategies to address racial disparities within our homeless crisis response plan, but also just generally across our system. We did successfully find some consultants that they've been working with our Lived Experience Steering Committee over the past year. We're coming up on 1 year. And their time was coming to an end. Their contract ended on August 31st. There is a slight extension just because they had some funds and they're going to help the transition to the new facilitators, but the consultants are consultants. And this was not a long-term process for them or program for them. So we included in our RFP, the consolidated 2023, set aside of $50,000 for an agency to apply to become the facilitators of this group ongoing. There were 2 applications that came in. One was from Partners in Prevention Education and another from Interfaith Works. They were very close in score. Interfaith Works, I think, scored 87 and Partners in Prevention Education scored 83. So very close. It was a tough decision for the advisory board to make, but they, what's the word I'm looking for? They put forward it's a recommendation. They recommended that Interfaith Works receive the contract to the RHC. RHC approved that recommendation and onward to the Board of County Commissioners. Following that decision, the Interfaith Works team met with the consultants and there was a misunderstanding of the level of support that the consultants were going to apply. There was an expectation on behalf of Interfaith Works that there would be a little stronger presence for the first year of that consultant group. And so after they took some time to talk, they consulted with us at our office, the Office of Housing and Homeless Prevention. They consulted with the consultants from Confluence, and then spoke with the Lived Experience Steering Committee. And after great determination, thoughtfully decided, I don't think we have the capacity to do this right now in order to support this Lived Experience Steering Committee at the level that they are currently experiencing support. So they thoughtfully declined to move forward with the contract. And so we brought it to the Homeless Services Advisory Board in July. And they and I reached out to Partners in Prevention to see if they were still interested, as they had applied, and brought it before the advisory board. Advisory board stated they would like to hear from PIPE before they made a recommendation to move the contract forward, partially because they wanted to be assured that their will was to carry the contract forward, and to that their capacity is at a point where they feel like they could carry operate this and facilitate this group. So on the 21st of just this last week, on Monday, 2 days ago, Partners in Prevention did come to the Homeless Services Advisory Board and presented. Lindsay Hill is the staff member there who came to speak not only towards her skills and her desire to facilitate, but just to assure that PIPE does have the capacity and the will to carry the contract forward. As you know, 2 of our advisory board members are on the Lived Experience Steering Committee, and one of them is our chair, Anthony Ducote. And the Lived Experience Steering Committee and was represented by them and stated that they felt good and comfortable with moving forward with PIPE. The recommendation put forward to you all. And they unanimously, the advisory board unanimously approved the recommendation for Partners in Prevention Education to move forward with this contract. And that is what I bring to you today to consider.
Questions? Anyone?
Kevin, anything you want to add, or you?
No, nothing to add. That was very concise, very good, a very strong timeline of the events that happened. I do want to say that with Interfaith and PIPE being the 2 organizations that originally put forth to take this contract, we had a long deliberation in regards to which agency we would go with, but never considered one agency unfit to take over that administration. That's the only bit of flavor I would add.
Okay, questions, comments from anyone else?
Got no questions. Very thorough. Thank you, Keely.
Okay. So there is a recommendation on there. Is there a motion?
Before the motion, I just wanted to, I guess, make the group aware that I am on the board of Interfaith Works, and I don't think this is a conflict of interest because it's actually Interfaith Works stepping away from a contract. But if you all would like for me to abstain, I would be happy to.
I don't think you need to.
Okay. Well, then I'd be happy to make the motion to go forward with awarding the new contract to Partners in Prevention Education.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those
Aye.
against say nay.
I just say that Caven always brings flavor. Hi, Caven. All right, so the second recommendation we're bringing to you today was discussed also on August 21st with the Homeless Services Advisory Board. So some background, also part of this year's consolidated RFP in our housing basic needs pot of funds. The Homeless Services Advisory Board recommended Sidewalk receive $40,000 of the housing basic needs funds to provide diversion services to single adults experiencing homelessness or on the verge of experiencing homelessness in our county. And so diversion is an element of coordinated entry. It's a decision-making process. It's often not necessarily always attached to funding, but certainly the funding is necessary, and we almost always run out of the diversion funds that we have for coordinated entry set aside every year, which is only 25,000 for the entire homeless population, meaning youth, young adults, families with children, and single adults. So on August 2nd, our office received informal notice that Sidewalk was going to be shutting its doors and would no longer be in operation. And so that gave us a little bit of time to pivot and think about what we'd like to do and to prepare to bring this in front of the Homeless Services Advisory Board. But we were not going to be able to unless we received formal notice from Sidewalk, which we did receive luckily on Monday morning. So on Monday morning, August 21st, we received formal notice that Sidewalk was shuttering and they would not be operating services and therefore could not follow through on the contract. So we brought this to the Homeless Services Advisory Board on Monday, and we brought the housing basic needs contract ease. So in the spirit of what those funds were distributed initially, bringing them some options, and one option was there were many options that they considered. One was just distributing it. They could distribute it throughout the current the agencies that are currently holding the contracts, amending those contracts. There was some conversation around just how do we disperse these funds. They're also previous to the informal and formal notification that Sidewalk was shuttering, a conversation that had been had with Olivia Hickerson, who was the executive director of Sidewalk and Family Support Center, since they do carry the diversion dollars, and would they have capacity? Would they be willing to take on the diversion funds if that were to happen? And Family Support Center indicated yes. So there were two motions on the table. One was to give the $40,000 to Family Support Center with the stipulation that they award or distribute those funds in the spirit of the scope as it is written for Sidewalk, which is single adults. And the other motion was one of the programs that was not fully funded was, I believe, Rebuilding Together. So to make that ask whole. So it was a $28,000 they were awarded, but it was 40 that they had asked for. So the motion was to give $12,000 to Rebuilding Together and the remainder to Family Support Center. But after some conversation, the board unanimously voted to approve the first motion to award the entire 40,000 to Family Support Center, as that was the spirit of the award that was given. That was what the advisory board decided what was an activity that they wanted to prioritize as the diversion activities. So I think that's it. I think that's all, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Keely. Questions? Go ahead.
Keely, what scope of work was Rebuilding Together or is Rebuilding Together doing within the homelessness services?
So that is a critical home repair for homeowners.
Right.
It's the same program that just received is being recommended to receive $75,000 from these funds. So it's
critical home repair
So
for
the
homeowners.
thinking was that would be preventing homelessness. Is that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any additional questions?
The bummer about sidewalk.
Indeed. Oh, I forgot to ask Haven. Haven, anything I left out?
The only thing that comes to mind is the consideration for one of Sidewalk's much loved programs within the community, which was the Ride Home program. And our consideration, especially when keeping that money within diversion practices, was that the single adult provider within our community, which assists with coordinated entry, could still use those funds to provide that same service. So that was a very strong consideration when making the decision.
Okay. No questions, comments? Okay, there is a recommendation for action. Is there a motion?
I move that we approve the recommendation to award the Family Support Center $40,000 of the 2163 funds for diversion activities, honoring the intent and scope of the original 40,000 award for sidewalk.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those again say nay. Okay, passes. Okay. So we'll move forward on to the RHC annual work plan, and we're only 3 minutes behind.
Impressive. All right, so we're coming back to, you may recall in June, we presented the board a draft work plan for the RHC that covers the remainder of 2023 and 24 year. We had, I think, a good discussion, so we're bringing back to you for hopefully a final draft. All work plans are living documents that evolve as circumstances change, but we're looking for your approval. This is substantially what you saw in June in terms of the types of activities, but we've done some formatting, so we've identified those projects in blue that we're hoping to complete in 2023. So those are our priority projects for the next couple months. Among those, including doing a crosswalk between the housing action plans between Olympia, Lacey, Tumwater, and Yelm. So staff are getting together in September to do that crosswalk. We're moving forward with that task. Looking at the fair housing plan and identifying what other specific activities that the RHC can take the lead in promoting. Elisa's working on a communications development plan. We have the interlocal agreement for Franz Anderson that is moving forward. Olympia's provided a draft, and I know we're working on getting final comments back to move that forward. We also we talked about a legislative agenda from the RHC. So for this year, really kind of figuring out what that is the consolidation of all the jurisdictions. So we want to just figure out how we move forward with that, whether there's a separate process for the RHC or really it's a consolidation or combining of various jurisdictional legislative agendas. So we want to have some discussion around that. And then the last one for this year is really focused on creating a comprehensive affordable housing funding strategy. So we talked in the past about trying to figure out a process for how to doing off-cycle funding requests, like came in with the Southport. Do we want to hold back in an emergency fund for projects that come up? So that's something we wanted to finalize this year. And then the items in orange are kind of the next tier of prior projects really working on into 2024. And then our ongoing activities, those things that happen every week, month, are highlighted in green. And at the end, we highlighted a few things that are just really more parking lot issues. So we added a desired outcome column to this table to identify a little more specifically what we hope to achieve. And then we also created a calendar, which really is pretty robustly populated for the rest of 2023. But then going forward, we will continue to fill in so you can see when things will be coming to the RHC as funding processes going forward, when do we need to start thinking about the next funding round and what those ongoing activities are. So hopefully just another way to kind of visualize the activities that we're looking for the RHC to do. And I think we will be adding a Quinn Street's long-term funding strategy to this work plan as well. So but substantially, there's no new activities that have been added from what we discussed in June. So happy to answer any questions. And if there's further refinements that folks would like to see to make this more user-friendly, happy to take those into consideration as well.
Thank you. Questions?
I think this is great. Thank you so much. Agree on the need to add something around Quinn Street Village in the long-term funding conversation.
Thank you. Any questions on the work plan?
I'd like to shout out the below the line projects and say that a lot of the things that are at the top of my dream list don't yet have a home or a host to lead those. But I hope we keep waving those in each of these conversations, because so many of them are much like the recommendations that we voted on today about stabilizing and maintaining existing housing and educating people as consumers of housing.
Yeah, I second that. That's also, the conversation that we've had as a group over and over again of like, when do we get to work on when do we actually do stuff together? Where's the policy work that we're gonna be doing? That's a lot of the stuff that is below the line and not yet slated for something, but I'm so glad that they're included on this work plan. It's kind of like our to be determined or to be scheduled list on our committees internally at the city. As long as we're maintaining that list, we know that that work is in front of us somewhere, even if it's not on a schedule yet.
And I think what will happen is that housing action plan crosswalk will be that process of looking at what are the commonalities across jurisdictions. And a lot of those items are in that kind of and based on that crosswalk, we'll be identifying, okay, what are the 2, 3, 4, whatever the number is, items that we want to elevate and start working on first. So I think that the housing action plan crosswalk is really going to be the critical first step to identifying, okay, what are those policy things as a region that we can work on, and whether that's working on as a region or having one jurisdiction taking the lead, and other jurisdictions are willing to take that work and bring it forth to their own jurisdiction. So within the tech team, I think that's been the thinking of really that doing that housing action plan crosswalk is the first step to identify what are the things from that below the line list that we're ready to move up that have regional resonance.
Yeah, that's good thinking. I totally agree with you there.
Any more questions, comments? No.
Are we taking action on this?
I
formally approve it?
don't think
So
so.
I would like some sort of, whether it needs to be a formal motion or not, I don't know, but kind of a thumbs up like this, if we
Yeah.
can kind of call this good and move forward with implementing it. As I said, it's a living document. We'll continue to add and revise it, but some acknowledgement or kind of thumbs up that we're good to move forward with this plan.
Can I ask a question really quick on the legislative agenda development? And that's something that I would like to have a conversation about. Because I think it is important. We've seen it like this year with the legislator and kind of what that's going to look like and whether the admin fees that we have would help us cover maybe for either like a lobbyist at the state that's gonna be specifically for the Regional Housing Council, or is it gonna be split up between the jurisdictions and we're all just gonna, whenever we're talking to our legislators, we're just gonna be presenting
the Regional Housing Council as well, kind of like what's gonna be the plan as we're developing that. You know, our priorities, like what's going to be the method that we're going to be advocating for those priorities? Is it gonna be each jurisdiction kind of gonna do its own thing, or is it gonna be someone specifically for the RHC that's gonna help us not only on that first step of like help us lobby, I guess, but also once that funding becomes allocated to kind of be able to, you know, help staff and kind of be like, okay, you know, this is the funding that's available. You know, we are gonna be pushing for additional funding, or maybe something didn't get through that we need to advocate a little bit more for. So I'm just kind of.
It's a good question. I think that's the first step that we need to figure out. And so talking a little bit off the top of my head, the tech team has talked about this broadly, but I think we need to have that conversation of what are our options, and maybe it involves the tech team bringing together the legislative leads from the different jurisdictions to having that conversation about what does make the most sense. We are not, you know, legislative lobbyists, and so talking to those folks, what is the plan that makes the most sense? And I know Keely, the HAT is also thinking about this as well.
The HAT is thinking about it, but also just the, you know, what role does the ACHS also play in? So like the Associated Counties, there's a human services, a lobbyist, Juliana Rowe, who grabs priorities from the homelessness and affordable housing work group subcommittee, and then also the behavioral health, and I think those two, so housing and behavioral health. But that's also like somebody who's lobbying on behalf of the counties.
Yeah,
So-
and that's kind of what I was gonna say with the Association of Counties for Juliana. Those have to be approved by the Legislative Steering Committee, which I am a part of, and those are extremely very difficult conversations to even have just a neutral stance on anything. So I just, it's just gonna be, I'm just being realistic about kind of that avenue. Tone, and then just.
I don't know if this is appropriate, but something to consider is investing in supporting folks with lived experience to testify at the legislature, you know, in telling their, you know, stories and being re-traumatized by probably eviction and whatnot, or homelessness, but folks who can articulate the message for the county, you know, for people in the county who are, yeah, that's a good method or strategy. And I mean, that's what we do. I mean, testify in the legislature and try to get funding for things. So let me know, and I know some people.
Yeah, just wanted to add, I've had, you know, as this group and the tech team have talked about work plan and legislative agenda, I've reached out to other regional councils, so SHAPE in Pierce County and SCIP in South King, which both are organized slightly different in that they have an executive director, that you know, that regional council is their job, but had asked the questions of like, what do you all do as other neighboring regional councils, and putting a legislative agenda to get like, do you do this? How do you do this? How do you then all like, you know, come to agreement on what projects or what priorities are on that agenda? So some good feedback from both of those groups. Both said, you know, they reach out to all of their jurisdictional, they're both bigger than we are, their jurisdiction membership, and I think even slightly beyond, you know, service providers, and kind of did a gathering of like, what is on everyone's minds, priorities that you all are thinking about. And from there, you know, kind of brought all of those back and decided as a group, what is gonna be our agenda. But one of the things that really stood out to me with both of those groups is that they identify agenda, and some of that agenda of their regional body, you know, the individual jurisdictions have their own agendas that are feeding into that as well. But once that regional legislative agenda is established, all of those jurisdictions, anytime they're in front of legislators, anytime they're talking about priorities, are not talking about them in a sense of this jurisdiction versus that. They're talking about them and presenting them as this is Pierce County's legislative agenda. This is South Kings or, Shape and Skips. So it's very much a collaborative effort, and the projects are, everything on that agenda is kind of taken as that regional body's agenda, not individual jurisdictions. So there's multiple communications going out from each member, each jurisdiction member of this is our regional priorities. Whether that's, engagement with the public, engagement with staff, engagement at the legislative, with, all those making decisions. So just wanted to add that we do have some examples of what other nearby regional councils are doing, that we can lean on for sure. That seem, they're a tiny bit further ahead of us, not a whole lot. But yeah, we're not alone, and there are some good examples.
Well, and I'll piggyback on that by saying, those are all north of us, correct? And we have seen legislation that does give preferential treatment to communities north of us because they have more capacity to do things. They're getting their needs met more than we are. So when I think about work that we as a body could do at the legislature, sometimes it's showing up and, talking to legislators and giving testimony. And it's also following the development of a bill and the nitty gritty and making sure that King County doesn't overshadow all the other communities around in terms of just language written into the bill on who gets what. And I also wanted to give a +1 to the idea that Talana shared in terms of having people with lived experience and compensating them for showing up and sharing their stories to help demonstrate the need that we do have in our community. So I think with those things, some resources towards some kind of legislative work is probably a good thing to consider.
Yeah, and we saw it, we just saw it with the DOC funding with Elkport Financial, right? And how they weren't included in that first round of funding, and all the funding was towards, I think, King as Snohomish County. And no one else was really included, right? So how do we get our name to be competitive enough that we are included in those lists of funding as applications are going through that are Thurston County projects and just being viable enough? That took, I think, an extra push to get them through that finish line, and it was great, but how do we get that happening again? And they had their own lobbyists, so I think that's why they were able to get across that finish line. But how about if it's for an organization who doesn't have those capacities to have a lobbyist, right? Like, I feel like that's at the point where we should be the ones advocating as well, because it's going to benefit all of us if we're going to be like, wait a sec, we really need this to get through the finish line. So.
Yes.
So I guess, any, thumbs up for the work plan?
Yeah, and a big thanks to staff for getting all of this written down. The part of me is relieved that we have a work plan, and then another part of me looks at that work plan and does not feel relieved at all.
Right there with you.
Never ending to-do list.
Yep.
Okay. And then, so Tom, do you need anything else?
So I think that's.
Okay, so communications update.
All right, so I'm Elisa Sparkman, the communication specialist for the RHC. And I just have a really brief update, some things to look out for. So since the recommendations from the Thurston Affordable Housing Advisory Board were accepted and will be moving on to be recommended to the Board of County Commissioners, we're going to put out an announcement. And so this is kind of a newer, in the past, we put out an announcement once the funding was approved by the Board of County Commissioners.
but there's been some requests within the jurisdictions to kind of put out more information as the processes are happening. And so we'll be putting out an announcement from the RHC that kind of explains what Tawana presented and shares the list, and that it's going to be moving forward to be recommended by the RHC to the Board of County Commissioners on September 12th. So that will be coming out by the end of the day tomorrow. I have a huge email list that I'll be sending that out to, and we'll post it on our website and on the Thurston County Public Health and Social Services social media, so that the jurisdictions can share from there. And when I do that, I also send it out to the jurisdictions communication people so that they know to share it. And so there's that. And then next week, there will be a news release for the exciting opening of the Franz Anderson Tiny Home Village. I'll be working with Darian and City of Olympia to make sure we have a nice, exciting press release. It's gonna go out probably Tuesday, August 30th. That's the plan. So yeah, that's everything we have for communications for the rest of this month, for as far as I guess it's only a week left of the month, but yeah, any questions?
Is there social media accounts for the RHC?
No.
No, is there a plan for that?
That is something that I think we could have a discussion about with I think among the different jurisdiction communicators, I think would be good to have in that kind of discussion, as well as maybe I think that's something I can put together some like pros and cons around that.
And the reason I ask is because we like looked internally at like our own social media and realized that we weren't saying enough about all of the work going on. So if that existed already, I was gonna suggest, that we connect better so that we can help share stuff. I'd be really curious about that list of pros and cons. And like, I can think of a few pros and cons myself. But if that already existed, I just was wondering, if we could help boost stuff up, but we are working on putting more of our own content out so that people know that action is happening.
Yeah, and so what I am doing is kind of developing social media branding specifically for the RHC. So when it does go out from the jurisdictions that are all part of the RHC, it's like RHC specific.
Okay.
If that makes sense. That's
So
what
you
that's what we're kind of doing for now.
So you like create imagery and send it out.
We use our beautiful logo.
I love that logo.
Yeah, it's a
a
nice
great
logo.
color.
It is. I'm a fan, so.
Sorry, we're just misbehaving a little bit. That's all. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Say,
Questions, comments? Oh, okay. Thank you. Next is good of the order. And does anyone, City of Olympia?
Yeah, I can share that last week. Yes, the Olympia City Council had a study session on a rental housing registry. And that is something that's going to be coming forward to as a business item sometime in November for our council. And it looks at registering rental homes in our community, but also incorporates an inspection component of it to make sure that we're preserving the housing stock that we have. So maybe you've read stuff online about it. We are working on that. And that's the timeline for moving it forward is it's coming back to the council in November.
Chair Cox, the City of Lacey.
Yes, our council just approved a fund and contract with the, oh gosh. Anyway, it's a mediation contract for renters and landlords to help them kind of take over where the federal funding left off and help settle disputes before they result in evictions. And I think we've put about $50,000 to that. Jennifer, if there's any more detail you'd like to add to that, please do. And you may have some other news of your own.
I don't think so, Carolyn. $50,000 is
is what our council approved through the end of this calendar year. And then to be reassessed after, we can see if the services are being utilized. So I believe that that's what we're moving forward on right now, and that will be available for both landlords and tenants. Of course, it's voluntary, unlike the state pilot program. And so council agreed that it should not pose, any additional threat to landlords, which has been a perception among especially larger property groups. But we do anticipate that it'll be, possibly more the mom and pop or smaller, property owners, smaller in numbers, maybe less than 5, right? Less than 5 units that would possibly lean towards using this service. So just another avenue towards having something available.
That's great news. That means all 3 cities are in on this. Has the county put any funds towards, the DRC contracts? No, okay. Well, awesome. Thanks, Lacey.
Yeah.
City of Tumwater.
Yes, good afternoon. Sorry I was late. A few little technical difficulties, but I don't really have anything to say specifically, other than we're really pleased with this project that we have going with the Housing Authority, and the housing for, it'll probably be mainly seniors. That's on Capitol Boulevard. And appreciate some of the help that other jurisdictions have given us through their own experience. It's a good thing. That's one of the things that the RHC offers, and we kind of don't realize it along the way. And that's when we share or we work together. Then when something comes up for our city or our region, we we have some lived experience that someone else can share on how to do things. So we appreciate that. And I don't know if Brad has any other things to share.
No, I just want to again thank the RHC for the funding recommendations for the 2 projects in Tumwater, both the Habitat for Humanity project and the Sequoia North project. We appreciate the regional approach to that. We definitely support that.
Yeah. And when Michael comes back, I'd appreciate it if you would ask him where he was or what he did on his vacation. Because I told him that I don't usually take requests from people that go to exotic places, and that I'm supposed to fill in for them. So I, might want to check in with our dear brother and find out. Anyway, maybe some of you already know what he's do, but
Love it. Get him, Joe.
thank you.
City of Yelm.
Hey, it's Gary. Not much to update other than we do have a project going to the city's hearing examiner and September 21st. It's a Habitat for Humanity project. It's a planned residential development. So it's 22 lot subdivision. It's going to be a townhome community designed for the 30 to 50% AMI range. So we're happy about that. And we've been approached about several other projects that have not actually yet come in for an application, but lately, without really our soliciting it, we've had a lot of interest in folks coming in for affordable senior housing projects and things like that. So I guess stay tuned.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Any of our advisory board members have anything they would like to?
Tomorrow's my birthday.
Oh.
Happy to lead around. Happy birthday.
No, that's it.
I guess my final statement would just be happy birthday to Lana.
Is
Thurston County, do we have anything? I couldn't think of that. Okay, so we do have this little tradition at Intercity Transit. Where we sing a lovely tune, and so I'm gonna ask Clark since.
Happy
Happy birthday to you.
Happy
Birthday, dear Talana. Happy birthday to you.
I had a birthday on the city council meeting and he did just.
Oh my goodness.
That's gonna happen.
You've all been warned.
Thank you. Okay, 5:52, and if there's not anything else, good to go.
Well, I'd like to just thank Carolina for taking over the gavel today. A little
Yes.
hard to do remotely, so good job.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
All the technical
I
issues.
know, wow.
Shoot.
Okay.